Hey everybody, welcome to the Marquez Says Show. I'm your host, Marquez Mosier, and this is my co-host, cohort, and eldest son, Austin Jordan. He and I always seem to bring out the feisty side of each other, and it leads to some very spirited conversations. There's never really any one topic. We see the world from many different perspectives, and sometimes we agree, and sometimes we don't. Either way, it gets very interesting, so sit back, relax, and have a bit of fun at our expense as we explore some of the most unexpected perspectives you'll ever hear about the world we live in. So, let's get started. Ho, ho, ho.
Don't call me a hoe.
Why not?
Because it's just factual.
Welcome to the Marquez Says Show. I was just going to cut you off.
I was going to say, because it's factually incorrect.
Is it?
Even though I wish it wasn't.
Yeah. Like I said, where you're at in your outlook on life. So, welcome to the Marquez Says Show. I am Marquez. This is my co-host, cohort, and eldest son, who is not a hoe.
Unfortunately.
So, giving props to all the hoes out there. You know, just gotta respect. Gotta do what you gotta do.
Do what you gotta do. Get it how you live it. It's 2020. Everybody's lonely.
If you say so. I read something about this is what you get when you mix your tarot cards with Cards Against Humanity.
Oh, God.
It's like, okay. I think actually it was the Mayan calendar that said 2000 was it, or 2012 was it, right? I think they were a little off. I think they were a little off.
You know what's so funny is I was reading something that apparently there's like, there was some sort of accounting for like an error in the dates or whatever, and that the 2012 would actually come out to be, what are you looking at?
You were recording our audio way before we...
Yeah. Because I thought we were going to start walking in sooner.
Okay, go ahead.
But that essentially there was a mistake in the way that the calendar was interpreted or whatever, and that it would actually be really close to 2020.
Well, and it would make sense. I mean, if you want, I would give all the credit to them. I have no reason to doubt their abilities. But when you're talking about millennia, I think you're being off by a decade. Probably is
pretty
just
damn
fine.
good, yeah.
Especially when you also, I was wondering why aren't there more people in the corner with the signs, other than maybe COVID, that are telling us that the world's going to end? Because it sure feels like we have the pestilence? We've got like this thing coming in, this virus, and then we have like,
And the start of the year had the locusts and the fire.
The Antichrist and all the other stuff. I mean, so, I was kind of like,
maybe it is the end of days.
I haven't seen any white horses, so I guess we're okay there.
Seen a lot of white knights. Oh, do you know that term?
No. Well, which version of it?
Well, like the way I'm thinking of it is like the simp, quote unquote, the person who's like having for women.
Yeah. Okay. No, I know simp because I actually some article I was reading and I'm like, okay, I was at first I was gonna get defensive of it and say no. Because I've always said, actually back in the day when, with my girlfriends, my friends would be like, oh, you're whipped, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And I'm like, no, I'm actually just treating her well. But now when I read like what they went to the extreme with simp, I went, oh, hell no, that wasn't me. That was no. Because that's kind of like, if you're not having arguments, then that's probably where you could define. If you're not having arguments, then you're in the quote unquote simping territory. If you are, then you could probably be on the other side because you're at least you're pushing back.
And there's and this kind of ties into actually what we're going to talk about a little bit today. Is like there's a difference between like just making it like being agreeable and like trying to keep things smooth and all that stuff and just keeping a relationship happy and with no disdain. But once you start to basically sell yourself out because you're trying to get something, like you're trying to maybe like, I don't know, common example is sleep with this person or whatever, then that's simping. That's like
absolutely. It's that comes back to a little bit of your self-respect. You can't lose all of it. I mean, if you are, then actually you're no use to the person. I mean, yes, that falls into winners. The idea behind today was just because we're post-election. So kind of the winners, losers, makeups, and breakups. That was just something that popped in my head, and I figured, okay. So you're right, talking about it from that perspective, if you're not having, makeups and breakups because you're just so busy trying to keep the relationship steady, that's a problem. That is definitely a problem.
Yeah. You can't sell yourself out.
So what level of fighting is acceptable in a relationship anyway?
Well, Bobby Brown might be a little far. But
somewhere before that,
I'd say is acceptable.
Somewhere there's a lot to go there.
No, I mean, it's I don't think there's a blanket statement for every relationship, because some people just communicate in a really hostile way, and it's not necessarily unhealthy, even though it might not necessarily be the most healthy.
No, I would go as far as to say that's unhealthy.
Well, it depends, because some people actually get something out of that.
That
Some
doesn't
people
make it unhealthy.
Well, kind of, maybe. Well,
You can get an STD.
comparatively-
That's unhealthy.
Yeah, well, that's but that's objectively unhealthy.
But no, I think that if two people, if their way of communicating is just yelling and tearing each other down, even if they end up,
Well, that's unhealthy. That's not exactly what I'm talking about.
what
I'm
are we
talking about
talking
like somebody. Like, let's say you argue about every little thing, like about going to dinner or whatever. But there's a difference between berating somebody and arguing. Like,
Well, I
some
don't
people
even-
are just argumentative.
Well, what
people.
if you're just bickering?
Like an old married couple?
I mean, we'll go the stereotypical.
Would that be unhealthy?
Yeah, I do, because it's negative energy. It's a constant stream of negative energy. If you're constantly bickering, if any decision is met with, oh, I knew you would do that, or something along those lines.
Well, it becomes more
I would-
personal that way, though, too. Those as soon as you throw in the, oh, well, I knew you would do that.
No, but the point is that that's bickering back and forth. That's an arguing. That's what makes it. Yeah, it's toxic. I would say it's unhealthy. Because you have to have a majority of positive energy. You have to have a majority of open communication. You know, that vulnerability, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. If you're just constantly in just the only way you get through something is basically yelling it out until you come to a resolution. Because that would be, the resolution, of course, could be quote unquote a good thing. But if you have to yell it out and have to argue it to get to that resolution, then yeah, I would say that's unhealthy.
Do you think that, going back to the example of the old married couple, do you think that that sort of bickering and stuff, is that something that should...
For me, generally, yeah,
Right.
I would not want to have that. I don't think that's, I would not want that to be acceptable. Because to me, that's the underlying reasons of it. The
Right.
underlying issues are the fact that they're not happy.
Is it a problem that it's a staple, that it's an acceptable staple in, like, relationships?
Yeah, because it sets the idea that, oh, okay, so if our relationship turns into us just kind of bickering and kind of like that, we're normal.
What are you supposed to do about it once you get up there into that age?
Well, at that point, it would be very, well, you could do the same things that a young couple could do. It may be a little bit more difficult, but at that point, if you haven't figured it out, if you haven't seen it coming, if you haven't actually, or I should say, done anything about it,
Mm-hmm.
I highly doubt you're going to all of a sudden be inspired to do anything different. Hence the reason why people have separate rooms. Hence the reason why they
Right.
do go on separate vacations. Hence the reason why they do things separately.
Do you think that these couples have the capacity, though, to be overall happy? Like,
Oh,
what if
the
the
capacity?
bickering? What if the bickering is part of, like...
Well, that's because it's become habit. It's become the routine that they've fallen themselves into. I absolutely think if someone came along and was able to show them it doesn't have to be this way, if one or both, of course, actually wanted to change it, then yeah, they would be completely capable of it.
If they're happy, and let's say that nobody ever shows them, right? Mm-hmm. Like that there's a different way, or they never want to do a different way.
You're
if
saying-
they're happy, would that invalidate the toxicity?
If they think they're happy, if they believe that they're happy, even though that's their pattern and stuff, then for them, they're happy.
Yeah.
But from an outsider who's looking at it objectively, it's unhealthy.
True. That's true. No, I agree with that. I think that it's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, is how much something feels to somebody in their world and in their life and all that stuff, and how much maybe the outside perspective doesn't so much matter compared to what somebody's experiencing in their world.
I think that's the danger of that is empathy. Because perception is reality. I do believe that. You make your reality. Mm-hmm. But you make your reality. That's not to say that there is another reality. You're making your reality. But if we go along the lines of saying that what we feel is our reality and that's all that matters, mm-hmm. even with the good intentions, then you run the risk of saying, well, I can't empathize or I can't feel for mm-hmm. someone who doesn't have my reality.
That's very true. I feel like what I'm saying, though, is the opposite of that, like the direct opposite.
It didn't sound like that.
Because what I'm saying is I'm 100% aware of what they're doing. I'm observant of it. So their little reality exists within a larger reality that we'll never be able to define. So they have their reality. For those who aren't watching the video, I've got like a little hand symbol. This is their reality. This is my reality. I'm seeing their reality.
Yeah.
Right? And they might see mine, they might not. Okay. But I'm being empathetic to the fact that that's their reality. Now, I can do what I want with that information.
Well, okay, first of all, you're not necessarily being empathetic just because you see it. That's not empathy.
Well,
you're
being supportive of it.
You're acknowledging their reality.
Well, sometimes that's all you can do.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I'm just saying. I was making sure that when you empathy is not a default for most people.
Right.
It might be for you. But I just meant.
So let's just make it even more basic then. I acknowledge, I see it.
Right.
Right.
And they might see yours.
But that doesn't mean that in this circle being me, or it could be interchanged with anybody else.
Right.
That doesn't mean that I'm choosing to ignore theirs and I'm existing here and they're existing here and there's no connection.
Well, yes, except for the fact that you guys are both within a bigger reality. So you're connected whether you like it or not. True,
but where we get into trouble, though, is where people choose not to accept, like what you said, which is unhealthy, and then you stop practicing empathy or acknowledgement of other
But I don't believe that. I guess my own personal belief is that just acknowledgement, for the most part, is only a singular step and is not usually enough. Because we are all connected. We are all our words are interconnected. And as soon as that thought of creeping through the door comes into your mind that says, my reality is my reality, and I don't necessarily, while I acknowledge your reality, it does not have any effect on mine, I would not agree with that, because your reality and my reality do interact with each other, whether we like it or not. Now, it can be minimal. We can actually strive to minimize it.
Yeah.
Or or of course we can also strive to enhance it and make it larger. But as soon as anybody says your reality does not have anything to do with my reality, that's where I think a breakdown of personal responsibility comes in. Mm-hmm. Then you could start saying that, well, I'm doing what I want to do because that's my reality, and you absolve yourself of personal responsibility to other people. Not necessarily yourself, and that's where that's dangerous. That's why it's so dangerous to me to use your structure.
True. So just because somebody could use it in a bad way doesn't mean that they will, though. So the principle that I'm talking about, I don't feel like is inherently a bad thing.
I think your principle is what it is.
Right.
I think that's actually the way it is. My world, your reality, my reality, and acknowledgement that we exist within a bigger reality.
Right.
Yes, I agree with you 100% there.
Yeah.
But I sensed you were going towards the feeling of that I'm okay with my reality and only dealing in my reality as long as I acknowledge there's another reality.
Yeah, that's not really where I'm going with it.
Okay, good.
I think that in some situations that has to be true, because that's the only way that people can walk away from something without.
True, absolutely.
But not in most cases, and I think it's a difference in the way that it is phrased. It's not so much that your reality doesn't impact my reality. I think it needs to be flipped. Is my reality doesn't impact your reality. And it does, though. Yes, but to an extent, only to what people want to believe that it does.
No, that's not true.
No. Well, let me explain it why. This is why I say that. It's not a truth. Yeah. But the reason is that because then you're gonna open yourself up to being put in a bad situation by assuming that other people are gonna view and accept your reality.
Where did the word "bad" come from?
What do you mean?
Just because I accept that your reality, or if I'm open to your reality.
No. Somebody being open to another person being open to your reality, not you being open to somebody else's reality. We know you're going to do that.
Okay.
But somebody else not offering you the same luxury.
They don't want to accept my reality?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that's bad.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Okay. That's where the bad comes from.
Right, but they're not subscribing to our philosophy.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is, at least for me, is I'm not going to put myself into that situation assuming somebody is going to look at my reality.
Okay, see, so then you're starting from a negative standpoint. Because that's
No, I'm starting from a realistic standpoint.
No,
is that people don't do that.
No, what you're saying is that if you have to start in one of 2 points. Either A, the other person is going to accept your reality, or they're not. There is no in between.
That's true, but could we both
so if
agree
if they're not going to accept your responsibility, that's bad.
Right.
And if they are going to accept my responsibility, at least, more for better or for worse, that's a good thing. I would just say it's a good thing versus it's a bad thing, because both of them can be mitigated. You can both of them.
Right.
So if you're going to look at it and you're going to take the standpoint that my starting point is that other reality is not going to accept my reality, then you're starting at a more negative starting point.
Okay. But can we both agree that that's most likely where most interactions are going to come from? Most people.
But most likely doesn't make it the way it should be.
No, it doesn't.
It comes back to like our conversation before this was you could choose to either start at a negative default or a positive default. Now, that's just the default. You may very quickly realize that, hey, I'm going to believe that other person's reality, that person's reality, they're going to accept or they're going to acknowledge my reality. But I very quickly realize that they don't.
Right.
And that would actually be on me if I don't. Like if it's blatantly obvious right from the start and I don't recognize that is my fault. That is on me. The flip side of that is if you start with the negative part of if they're not going to accept my reality, then you're going to have to go out of your way to look for them accepting your reality.
Not necessarily.
Well, no, because your default is they're not going to accept my reality. So
that doesn't mean that you don't act as if it was the positive way, though. That doesn't mean.
No, what I'm saying is that the negative, the starting in the default negative, that they're not going to acknowledge my reality. When would that change? When would you change? Why would you change? Why would you actually change in your viewpoint that they are actually acknowledging my reality?
That would be exactly when you changed the way you're approaching the situation.
I'm not sure I follow that.
If you let's say you go into I'm just saying that I think that.
Well, I guess it's this way. My actions are going to be as I go through, my reality. I guess it's an isolationist theory that if your default is that they're not going to acknowledge my reality. So therefore, I'm going to go through my life assuming that they're not going to acknowledge my reality. For the most part, that's going to dictate decisions that aren't reaching out, that aren't necessarily going to be that inclusive to any other realities. Wait, let me finish. Because I'm looking at it from they're not going to accept me. So why am I necessarily trying to get them to acknowledge? I shouldn't use accept. Why am I trying to do anything that's going to have them acknowledge me? I'm just going to do stuff that doesn't actually have anything to do with them.
Well, because just because you're having those thoughts and you're thinking that way doesn't mean, again, the thought is not the action. So you can still have those feelings and still put yourself into situations because you haven't given up on other people or whatever.
But you're right, and I agree with that. But if you started with the default that they are going to, then you don't have to have that. You don't have to overcome that.
Okay, but when the likelihood of they're not going to.
Well, see, likelihood is your own view of it. It's not a likelihood.
I mean, you said earlier that most people don't approach empathy as the default.
Right. Even if it's not a likelihood, it's still your individual choice. There's no likelihood. You do not have to.
Why would you make that choice?
To be positive?
No, to
my default positive. That's what you're asking me. Is that why would I decide to, as my default, assume that someone's will acknowledge my reality? As a default, I am going to think that person's reality, that they're going to acknowledge my reality. That's my default.
Okay, but you also acknowledged earlier that most people's default is not empathy.
No, not empathy, but acknowledgement. That's why we distinguish between the two.
Do you think most people's default is acknowledgement?
It's not actually, you can't prove one way or the other. That's what I choose to do. I choose to believe that. Because if I chose the other, I would starting in a negative. That's the point. I think
that you're seeing it a little more black and white, though. It's not necessarily positive or negative.
It literally is a binary choice. Do you want to start
your life? We're not computers.
It is. It doesn't matter. It's a binary choice about whether or not you want to look at life when it all comes down to it. You can hedge your bets. You can hedge your bets. You can be cautious. You can make sure you can mitigate however much you want. But when it comes down to it, when you keep breaking it down further and further and further, you have a singular choice of whether or not you're going to look at a situation, what thoughts you're going to have are going to be positively slanted, not necessarily full on positive. It can be just positively slanted or negatively slanted. And everything derives from that. Now, you can be negatively slanted and easily changed. You can be negatively slanted but very open to changing your mind and stuff like that. That's fine, and that's the next best thing. You're by default looking at things negatively, but you're hopeful that things can change very quickly. That's okay. But you could also take that and just tweak it just a little bit, and you could also start positive. Now, the opposite is true. You could start with a positive slant, but then get jaded real quick.
It feels like a very self-assured take to say is like, well, this is positive and this is negative.
It's my choice.
Yeah, no, that's true, and I understand more than anybody is that your opinion is
you choose how you react to a situation. That's all it comes down to. You choose how you react to a situation.
Yeah, but the reaction isn't the thoughts. You could think something and act differently.
Your perspective creates your mindset. Mindset creates basically dictates your decisions, and your decisions create your situation. So if your perspective is positive, everything will flow from that.
I don't know. I think that people have the capacity to be more disciplined than that.
What is the discipline? If you're not, okay, let me ask you this then. If you're not starting at a positive point, where are you starting?
You could be in the middle.
No, actually. There is no neutral.
I don't think it's black and white.
How would you be neutral?
By just letting, like, something exists. Is like that light that electrical socket. It's neither positive nor well, I mean, I guess you could talk about it's in a moral sense, it is neither positive nor negative.
Correct, except for the fact that as soon as you say something having to do with that, people can look at that, and a parent can look at that and go, "That's a danger," because if somebody sticks a fork in it, my kid sticks a fork in it, they're going to electrocute themselves.
Or it could be a positive because somebody can look at that and say, "I'm going to plug my television into it," and the kid's going to be distracted for hours.
So which are you going to choose?
You don't have to choose either because it exists right now, it just exists.
When it becomes a perspective, what is your perspective on that?
Right, but it doesn't have to be right now.
That's not my point. It's whenever that time does come and you have to choose a perspective.
Well, it would depend. Do we need a TV plugged in, or is it a potential hazard?
Right.
Which would be situational.
Yes. And which one are you going to choose? Because you could also argue that it's positive, that you're looking at it from the perspective of, I'm glad I acknowledge that that's there and that electricity because we're having a young one come over and I want to make sure I put all the forks away because I don't want them to plug it in. That's a positive.
It's situational.
Right, it is. And what are you going to choose? When that situation arises, when any situation arises, what is going to be your choice?
I feel like we've switched perspectives because generally I'm the one who's saying that there's never a no-win scenario.
Yeah, right.
And then you're always like, well, sometimes there is. And from what I'm hearing from you right now is that...
No, I don't. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. Well, I'm saying that if you're faced with a choice of a gun to your head and it's either to give up your best friend for something or, I don't know.
Sorry, Jeff. You're dying.
I'm just kidding. or not. You have a choice, and people will say, "I don't have a choice. I had a gun to my head." You had a choice.
Yeah, you just didn't like your choices.
You just didn't like your choices, and so that's the point. You have a choice, and if you're looking at that, you can look at it from the perspective. What perspective are you going to look at? That's like, okay, this is not a good situation. And that's one of those ones where, okay, your perspective looking at it, it's hard. You can't necessarily be positive about it. But for someone to actually then turn around and go, the reason I confessed or the reason I gave up my friend was because I had a gun to my head. Mm-hmm. Well, then it was self-preservation, and you could argue that that's a negative thing. Someone could argue that was a natural thing. But what are you going to look at? Well, how are you going to when you're faced with that decision? Are you going to look at it like, well, shit, I guess I might as well just go ahead and confess or, give them up?
Are you asking me like what I would do if there was a gun
just in general? There's always any situation. There is a way to look at. I can either die a hero because I didn't give him up,
Or live long enough to become the villain.
I knew you were going to say that. So, and we are talking about generalities, but ultimately each perspective, and you talk about it being situational. You're right. That's life. Life is a bunch of situations. And if that is literally my point about, if you're going to look at something, why wouldn't you start as a default looking at it positive and be proven wrong, as opposed to looking at it negatively or negatively slanted and then having to be proven wrong?
Because sometimes it's not worth it. Are there absolutes in life? Are there absolutes in life?
I have a hard time with that one. I go back and forth between my philosophical self.
Because if there are no absolutes in life, then nobody should be absolutely positive.
Those are mixing the absolutes. You're talking about truths, absolute truths, and then absolute positives. Those are emotions. You're talking about an absolute truth.
No, truth is not an emotion.
What is a truth? We're talking about realities. If you want to get philosophical in this, there may not be an absolute truth.
Okay, but we already acknowledged earlier there is, because we all operate. Yeah, that we all operate within.
I guess then there is absolutes. Then you've already answered your question.
Well, that's what I'm asking you.
No, you answered your own question. You said if there's absolute truths, then there is absolutes, which means you could be absolutely correct.
Yeah, it checks out.
Okay, so therefore, the question of is there absolutes doesn't make a difference.
No, it checks out. So, but do you believe? Okay, but we also acknowledge though that we aren't cognizant of that absolute reality. That we will never know exactly what that absolute reality.
So again, I don't know. I'm not sure where the confusion is coming in. When faced with any situation, any choice, you can either default to a more positive aspect or default to a more negative aspect. Now, if it's neutral, where it's like, hey, look at that electrical outlet, that's not really a choice. You're not asking me to do anything. If you say, what do you feel about that, or how do you feel about that electrical thing, or do we need to cover that electrical thing up?
What's the illustrative point is that not everything is an active choice. Some things just are.
Like what?
Just randomly.
Wait. Things just are, but how we react to those things that are just are is what makes a difference.
As it becomes a situation, or as it becomes something to act upon.
That's always what I've said, is when it becomes the point of action. Yeah, that's my choice. That's what I've been saying this whole time, is when it comes to the fact that you have to do something, look for something, choose something, whenever that part involves it, do you lean towards a more positive aspect or starting point, or a negative default? Negative default or positive default?
I think what concerns me sometimes about consistently and always being positive is that when you're always positive, you can overlook something because you want to overlook something.
That's not what positive. That's not what it is. I said talk about a default, because then you have to bring in self-awareness, situational awareness, and all those things. You just have to have a starting point. If the starting point is I'm going to look at this thing positive, it's on me. If, like I said, if I don't all of a sudden, realize, shit, I was wrong. This is a negative situation, or I should have been looking at this negatively. That's on me. And if you, like you talked about, if someone is so positive that they're missing the obvious, or they're that stuff, that's on them. That's a self-awareness issue. That's a situational awareness issue. That is on them. That is their personal responsibility to make sure that if I choose to default positive, therefore I make sure that is balanced. And vice versa. If you choose to take a negative, it's more incumbent upon you to be aware in order to be, because if you choose to be negative and that is your path, then obviously it's going to be, for lack of a better term, bad. If you choose positive, in other words, if you choose negative to start and you don't do anything else and you just let life happen to you, quote unquote, you're going to have a miserable life.
Right.
And if you're positive, and if you're positive, if you choose positive and you choose nothing else, but everything that comes your way, you've looked at it, in rosy, it's probably going to be, you might actually have your reality, might actually be quite happy.
Right, but those around you, ignorance.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. But those around you, like when we're looking at that reality, we're probably seeing you simping.
That's foolish. Well, yeah.
Right. So, but in their reality, they're happy. In the one that went down the negative path, they're not.
I don't think negativity though doesn't necessarily impact your happiness. Some people become some people are happy in their.
No, they're not. They
in
think
their
they're
misery.
happy. Their reality, they think they're happy. But if you have, as soon as they have to interact with other people, interact with other realities, they're not happy. They have that because they can be self-destructive. That's like talking about a drug addict who has no idea they're a drug addict.
Well,
they think their life
to
is
extremes again. It's not necessarily that extreme.
I would say that if somebody is negative, they're not going to be happy. I'm only talking about in the context of our of our conversation here, which is now about realities, which is cool.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm totally fine with that. Just
changing the title.
Yeah. But yes, in their reality, like in their aspect, but that's self-delusion. That's a self-delusional happiness. That
to you.
No, but it is that's again. I am on the outside looking at the reality. I am on the outside looking in, and that would be how you would say it, is that person, by any quote-unquote generally accepted definitions of happy, they're not. They're not a happy person. They may, if they think, if they derive enjoyment from criticizing everything, from looking at everything that's negative, because that they've gone down the negative path, in their mind, they're like, I told them.
Right.
They thought that so-and-so thought they were so smart, but I told them that, and they're all happy about that. Oh, sure, they're happy. But when you step back and you're looking at that person going, what a miserable life. And it's kind of like, you know what? You be you, dude.
Right.
If you want to have if you want to be, have your miserable life, but you think it's cool, great.
There's some people that genuinely think that.
Yeah, absolutely. And when they get into relationships, unless they get into a relationship with someone who's like them, which leads us back to the beginning, those are the people that are screaming at each other. They're the ones that are communicating and stuff. And we will look at it.
Which goes back to my original point of they're existing in their world. We're seeing that world. We disagree with that world.
Well, disagree is not necessarily no. I can acknowledge it, and I can just tell them, you know what?
You can acknowledge it.
Well, you know what? I would say, I would say I would disagree, but the difference would be is that there's three levels. There's the acknowledgement, there's the disagreement, agreement, and then there's action towards it.
Right.
I can sit there and go, I've acknowledged it, I disagree with it, but I am not taking any further energy or action towards it. Now, there's some people, though, that can't do that.
Nope.
They see it, and they have to try to fix it. Now, sometimes, I think we're all, at some point, with certain things, we all fall into one, two, or three of those. But my point being, though, is that again, though, that comes back to the self-awareness and the personal responsibility.
Yeah, no, for sure. Definitely agree with that.
I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want to necessarily be associated with that. I wouldn't want people to look at that as, I would actually, maybe not actively, but I certainly would not tell someone and say, that is okay.
Yeah, no, definitely. I don't think we should tell people that's okay. I think what's really interesting to me, though, is the concept of relativity and just...
Well, there's a lot of layers to it. That's the point. That's the point of doing. And actually, with relativity, I mean, just the like relative realities. I mean, from that perspective, it always comes back to a personal responsibility. And again, I'm harping on this again. What decision? What is going to be your default? That's what it comes down to. What is your default as a person? Like, who do you want to be as a default? Do I want to be somebody who will make my first step forward? Or my first step back.
And I think that sometimes stuff like that just kind of happens, though. I'm not so sure that... Now, generally, of course, your mindset is going to 100% dictate what comes of your life almost every time. But sometimes that doesn't happen that way.
No. And I think if I understand what you're saying is, like, there's some situations where you can just be neutral. Yeah. You can.
I do think that gets you into trouble, though, because if you're just constantly neutral, then by definition, logically, if you explain that through, very little would ever happen.
So each situation is different. I get that. But ultimately, though, when push comes to shove, that's why I am saying that. That's why I'm such a believer in the fact that what is your default?
Yeah, my default is to, even though you might not see it right now, is to generally be positive and see things in a positive way.
I would absolutely say that's your default.
Yeah.
I always said you are in a place right now where I feel that it's difficult for you to default that.
I think what I'm trying to do, and I might overdo it sometimes, is I'm trying to remove the wool over the eyes in most every situation to figure out, well, okay, what was right in the first place, what wasn't.
Right.
But I think that that's something more people should be doing, because you can't experience a true positivity without having known what the opposite was. Just like anything else, you can't know true happiness unless you knew what it was like to be sad.
That's not true. Now, you can appreciate it more. But there can be someone who had a wonderful childhood, and they meet their high school sweetheart, and they get married, and they have a wonderful life. Literally, by anybody's standards. And they did not have to go through heartbreak. They did not have to go through a bad childhood. They did not have to have anything bad happen to them.
I'm sure that they would tell you that they had things, though, that hurt them.
Yes, but remember this, though, the appreciation. If they had a bad childhood, if they had bad relationships before they met their sweetheart, and stuff like that, it would make their that happiness that much. They would appreciate that happiness.
Right, but again,
I don't think it changes the height of it.
It's also relative to their life, though, because I'm sure, like, maybe to us.
You know what? That's a great example, because the one I just gave you, the height of their happiness could be lower than the height of someone else's happiness.
Right, but they won't know it.
Correct. Exactly. That's where I was going. And the peak. So, but they still, but saying that to experience true happiness, you have to go through like true misery, for lack of a better term. I'm just saying that's not true.
Well, yes and no. This is where I see it. Is yeah, in the way that you just explained it, yeah, that makes sense. Right. But the person who's quote unquote lived a totally happy life, they're not going to feel that way. I'm sure there's going to be something like maybe their dog died or something, which is a relatively inconsequential thing.
Right.
But to them, because they had no other trauma, that impacted them in the same way that a more significant trauma might impact somebody else.
I don't think that, yes. I think the fact of having, when you say true happiness versus true misery or whatever.
We'll rephrase it then to peaks, or like maybe a higher capacity. Not even so much that you experience it, but the capacity to experience it.
I get what you're saying. It's basically the lower the lows, the higher the highs.
Right. Which there's no real way to know if that's true or not.
I always come back to where people say, learn from your mistakes, make sure you fail often, all that kind of stuff. It's like, that's bullshit. No, you don't have to fail a lot. You don't have to make a lot of mistakes. You need to make some. You need me to learn from them, because inevitably you will. Mm-hmm. But you can learn just as much from someone else's mistakes.
Oh, definitely.
So that you don't need to do that.
Well, and that's what you're talking about, is being observant.
Right.
Personal accountability and personal self-awareness.
Yeah, and the responsibility, we talked about these realities, is that, again, I want everybody to default to a positive. Now, it doesn't mean you stay positive. It doesn't mean that... it doesn't even mean that you stay positive. It doesn't even mean that you consistently look for positive. But at least if your default is positive, the chances of negativity go down. Because if you do the other way, in the analogy that we used when we started about the realities, your reality, my reality, a greater reality, is when as soon as someone says, my reality is better, that's a bad thing, or my reality is independent of yours, so therefore I can do whatever I want.
That's a cop-out. That's an excuse.
But that's what happens when you start saying, by the model itself of, I've got my ball of reality, you have your ball of reality, we're inside a bigger ball of reality. It lends people who are not willing to be aware of themselves, accept responsibility, they immediately have a built-in excuse to say, you stay over in your ball of reality, I'll stay in mine.
But it's not. That's their decision. They're making a decision to be like that.
Right. And they're making it based on, from what I would feel, is a negative default, because they're scared. They're nervous. They're afraid of their reality mixing with someone else's reality.
Yeah, but that doesn't change the fact that, like what I was saying, with our balls of reality and a larger ball of reality.
I remember. I'm sorry, not to cut you off this time, but I remember what you're saying. But I am going to look at them, and I am going to, my default is, instead of saying that person is going to not want to interact with my reality, I'm going to look at it from, they are willing to at least acknowledge my reality. They may not want to interact with my reality, but I'm going to start at a positive. My default is positive, and say, you will acknowledge my reality. Not as in you will command, but as in...
I know you mean. You're going to.
They are open. How about that? They are open to acknowledging my reality. As opposed to the negative default, they are not going to be willing to acknowledge my reality. Because as soon as you say that, then all of a sudden you put yourself on the defensive going, well, you know what? If I'm right and they are not going to acknowledge my reality, well, fuck them.
Yeah.
And now you're off in a horrible way, a horrible direction. But the opposite isn't true. The opposite, if you say they are going to acknowledge my reality until you get burned, until it proves otherwise. Mm-hmm. And it may never, because that person may never actually prove you wrong.
I don't think that there has to be so much anger associated with like that first example you were giving, but I do agree with the overall point. That I don't think so much that people, when they're approaching things with the quote unquote negative way, they're not trying to be guarded or angry.
No, they may not be trying to, but again, though, it comes from a negative default.
But again, the relativity is what we're...
Right, but it comes from a negative default because before they start getting guarded, they have to make a choice. Am I going to be guarded? Am I going to be cautious? Am I going to be, am I approach this in a very cautious manner? You know what I mean? Those are all choices. They had to choose those. And if you're choosing that, then... Now, again, you could do that as a positive as well. Because if you're in a bad situation... You can be cautious. That's probably the most positive thing you could do. It's not being negative. It's actually being cautious. But again, I was talking about the default. I was talking about where we don't know anything yet. You know what I mean? Like if we're envisioning it, I can look across and see someone else's reality. They can see my reality. Mm-hmm. We have no reason whatsoever to believe that either one of us is bad or good. That's the thing. Right there, it's neutral, like you mentioned with the outlook.
Yeah, and if something is
neutral, right? So the nanosecond, it goes beyond neutral. Like if my thought is, if I look over there and I see them, okay, hey, there's another reality over there. I can't imagine anything coming to the next thought not being, I wonder. I wonder if they're nice. I mean, fight or flee, right? I wonder if they're nice. I wonder if they're mean. I wonder if they see my reality. Do they see my reality? I wonder if they see my reality. All of the answers to all of those, my default is a positive. Do they see my reality? That one's actually, okay. You know what? I'm not sure. That you can do that one. I'm not sure they see my reality. But you know what? Just in case, I'm going to assume they see my reality.
I think...
Or you know what? I'm going to... Because again, right there, even my own analogy right there, I'm going to assume they see my reality.
Yeah.
Is a positive.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I'm going to assume they don't see my reality. And that's a negative. It's not really negative. I mean, I agree with you when you've told me before where that negative is very thin.
I agree with you. I agree with everything you just said. What I would challenge, you're not challenged, but the way that I see it though is, not everybody is going to think that though. So let's say they might not consider your reality at all, not because it's negative or not because they're choosing not to, but because they're just in their world. They're not thinking about anything other than their world.
Then that's a negative.
Well, is it?
Yes, because it's inevitable. I mean, there is no if someone else, think about it this way: if someone else can't see my reality, how is that possible? And I'm not talking about if you're going through your daily life, you don't have to acknowledge me. I'm talking. I'm literally thinking in the grand sense of, like you talked about philosophically, that as a person, someone else, how could I be so wrapped up in my own life, or vice versa? If I am so wrapped in my own life, I'm so wrapped up in my own life, my own reality, that I don't acknowledge I don't even realize that there's other people. I would think that is going to, maybe not right then and there, that is going to lead, that's isolation, loneliness, that you know what I mean? And I think that is a choice, by the way. It is a choice that if I'm actually making a choice that I'm so wrapped up in my life that I am not going to make time for anyone else's reality. And if you don't believe that there is anybody else's reality, then I don't know if that's worse or not, because then all of a sudden you're saying that I'm the only one. How selfish is that? If I don't even acknowledge that there's other realities.
Most of the greats got to be that great by doing that, though.
No, they didn't. They knew there was realities. They chose to ignore it because they wanted to concentrate on their genius.
Which is what I'm saying, though.
But they acknowledged it.
Yeah, well, I'm not talking about the not acknowledging, but the choosing to be.
No, right before this, you said, what if that person doesn't even know?
Yeah, I'm moving on from that.
Yeah, it doesn't even know that there's another reality.
Yeah, and I'm moving on from that because that's the sort of ignorance.
Oh, no.
We could talk about whether that's good or not.
Right.
But
no, the genius aspect is fine. I mean, that's because most of the geniuses...
Is it though? It's selfish.
Well, I was about to say, the genius aspect is what I was going to say is that they're making a choice. They're making they're making a selfish choice.
It's a negative choice.
It is. And it's just one that we benefit from because of their genius. But it doesn't take away from the fact, like Michael Jordan.
Would you tell them to be more positive?
Yeah.
It would change if we told Steve Jobs to be more positive when he started doing his thing, it would change the way that...
We don't know that, though. That's the thing. You don't know, because who is he at his core? Is he actually a jerk? Yes, I think he is.
Seems like a pretty negative guy.
Yeah, I've read his book. I mean, I've read his biography and stuff, and all accounts is that, yeah, he was not a nice person.
Do you think that Steve Jobs being a positive person would lead to everything he accomplished? I genuinely don't. And that's why
okay, but what you're accounting for is that how do you know it wouldn't have been greater? Because how many great
there's
people,
no way to really know
how many geniuses that are actually in a positive light? Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King. How many geniuses that were actually thinking of the greater good, who are actually thinking beyond themselves?
There's a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, so it's the same concept.
Okay, but that kind of proves my point, though, is it doesn't mean that either one is necessarily going to be greater than the other. Because all these geniuses
actually, that's not true. Because if Steve Jobs, if we told him to be more positive, and he actually ended up being more brilliant than he was, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, but the same could be said. We could have told Martin Luther King to be more
selfish,
negative,
and that would not have been a good thing.
We don't know that.
Oh, we do. Because if you tell someone to be more selfish, or if you tell someone to, dial it back or something, like with what he was trying to achieve, I think, I mean, I guess there is obviously, I'm going to leave it open to the possibility, but I would generally think that when you're, hey, you're trying to be good for everybody. You're trying to be a greater good. Maybe, you know what? That's probably not the best use of your energy. That's whoever's telling them that is coming from a negative place. I'm saying that
the desire for self-preservation might be stronger than the desire to move people forward. Isn't potential...
Then I would say that's actually, that would be a negative thing. And if you're okay with that, if your desire for self-preservation is greater than your desire to be for the greater good, that's your choice. That's your reality.
Yeah. Well, that's all I'm saying is if we're going to hold Steve Jobs to if he was more positive, he could have been more brilliant. We get to take what I just said, apply that to MLK. And
in a negative, in the opposite?
Essentially, by saying that, if his intentions were to do this for himself, quote unquote.
I think the only thing you could argue with that, Austin, is that if you told him if he was a little more, if he was going to get killed, he's going to get killed. I mean, if somebody wanted to kill him, the only thing I can think of is that maybe if he was a little more cautious, didn't stand on open windows, didn't stand in front of stuff, and he wasn't killed, that self-preservation, the pessimism that, hey, my life is going to end. Hold on, let me finish this out. Then he could have accomplished even greater things. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, yes, if he had been a little more negative, maybe cynical even, about the chances of him living, could he have gone on and done greater things? Yeah. So therefore, a negative could have became a positive.
Right.
So there is that angle of it, but that's not quite the opposite of Steve Jobs. So...
Yeah, no, it's not quite the opposite. That wasn't exactly what I was using with the MLK, but I like your example better, so we can use it that way.
I figured that was where you're going with it.
It wasn't that, but it was similar, but not exactly.
Because otherwise, we can start wrapping this conversation up. It all comes down to, it will always come down to, what is your default? Yep,
and I agree with that, and I do think that more good will come of defaulting to be positive. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be cautious. Because I will be cautious with most everything I approach. But having that positive idea that it's going to work out...
that's different. And that's for another show.
That is for a different show.
That's optimism. And there's a huge difference between being positive and being optimistic.
I'm interested to hear that one. So we'll have to save that for another. Yeah.
Well, the short version of it, just because we can wrap that up in as a teaser. The positive is just basically, literally, like I said, the default. Yeah. Like the default of what you're going to do. The optimism is, to me, the belief that something is going to work out when you have no reason to believe it will. Mm-hmm. It's partly positive. I mean, it starts with a default positive, but you don't have to always be optimistic. I mean, actually, I think I would almost say, that's a good one. I'd have to think about that one.
We'll think about it. All right, think about it, and we can do it.
But there is a difference. There is a difference between the two.
Well, I wish that we had established that earlier on in the conversation, because that would have probably altered the course of the conversation.
Yeah, because there is a difference between the two. So,
well, that's good. Did you want to elaborate on your optimism thing, or do you want to think about it a little bit more?
No, it comes down to when someone says, "Oh, you're so optimistic." It's like you don't, or positive. It's like you're not positive all the time. You know that there's things you can be negative at, but that's why I say it's a default. And the same thing with optimism. But positive is a choice that I'm making. Just like the default of being positive is that I will be optimistic as opposed to pessimistic. But you could still have technically a default of a positive and be cautious. That would make you kind of cynic or more pessimistic.
Right.
But you can still be a positive pessimist. It's not normal. It's not usual.
Yeah.
But right now, I would say you're a positive pessimist.
Right.
And part of it is because you talked about taking the wool off your eyes and things like that. Yes, because that's because you're being self-aware. What you have to remember, though, is that sometimes what is like what's in front of you is indeed like Lee Harvey Oswald. It's possible that he was a lone shooter and he did it.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to believe that. But it's very possible. And all the evidence, actually, because there hasn't been any real credible or any evidence that to the otherwise. It's all just conspiracy theory. There hasn't been any really solid evidence that he did not act alone. And that would be one of those ones where, well, shit, that sucks to believe that he literally did that. So, but because of, but at some point you have to acknowledge the truth of something. I mean,
it's like
a
one of the
relationship.
most controversial ones to do it. We're supposed to be ending it.
Well, no, but I mean, no, it's not necessarily saying that I do believe that, because I think that there's certainly enough to raise questions. But what about a relationship? That's the other one. At some point, the relationship is over.
Yeah.
It is. It's over. And you have to just accept the fact that it's over.
Yeah.
But some people won't. Some people will keep trying. Some people will cut it early. But sometimes it's just, that's it. It's over. So.
True.
So yes, the difference between a positive and then optimism. And the optimism is usually something that you choose to do. In which case, of course, that's because your default is positive. So.
True. And that you can kind of work your mind to believe anything. Like, you can turn a negative, quote unquote, into a positive, or you can just as easily turn a positive into a negative.
Yeah. And that's why, and maybe I'll make a post, maybe kind of elaborate on it, because this conversation illuminated the fact that what is your default? Where is your default? What is your default? That will literally dictate the course of your life.
Right. I think that's a good question to leave them with. What is your default?
And
then the why will be for another day.
And the difference between positivity and optimism. It's not great, but there is a difference.
Right.
There is certainly a difference. It's just so. So think more, care more, live more, and remember, you can change your life. We can change the world. One decision at a time.
We got the remix version of it there.
All good?
All good.
Talk to you next time.